Where is the source of this information and how reliable is it?
So this was interesting because it was actually accidentally published by the World Health Organization on their clinical trials database online. And it was a summary of the result of the trial, which was that it didn't have any effect on the patients and it didn't have effect on their condition or on their viral load. That's been confirmed that that was true by the World Health Organization and by Gilead. But the questions really are, what does the details lower down from the trial tell us in terms of maybe there was some subset of patients that did benefit? And also, is there any more information that they will give us when they finally publish that under peer review?
There was one thing that's been thrown around, Hannah, since this came out, that to downplay perhaps whether we should be extrapolating too much from this trial, which was that there weren't enough people in it or that there were no control functions. Can you tell us more about that and whether we should be discounting anything at all from this?
So there actually was a control arm in this study, and in fact, this was the first randomized control trial for the drug, which is why people were watching for it. One thing to bear in mind is that it didn't actually finish. One of the difficulties of doing trials in these situations is that they started this trial in China when actually there was a lot of coronavirus patients. There aren't so many coronavirus patients now, so they didn't actually finish enrolling it. So that's worth bearing in mind. One study is always one study. There are huge studies going on by the WHO, by the National Institutes of Health in the US, looking at remdesivir because there is a lot of hope for it. And there's also many, many studies looking at some of the other drugs that could help.
Meg, talk us through what else we should be watching. There's NIH studies that seem like, as far as having actual statistical evidence, control groups, peer groups are going to come out and are going to be much more reliable for the medical community. Which one should we be watching, and how seriously are you taking this one?
Well, so the first thing we're going to be looking for is in the next week, Gilead should be releasing the results from the first of its clinical trials. That's going to be in the more severe patients treated with remdesivir. And they've guided to that being at the end of April. So that's within a week. The problem with that study is that it's not tested against a control group. So there are going to be caveats when we see those data as well. Also, those were more severe patients. And the takeaway from what everybody's sort of observing in these China results is that the drug might work better when given earlier. And in fact, Gilead said that in its statement in response to this story, that there were signals that when given earlier, this drug worked better. So that's the first thing we're going to see. Then we're going to see another trial from Gilead in more moderate patients. And then the gold standard that everybody's going to be looking for is the NIH trial of remdesivir. That's going to be by the end of May. And they actually did do a placebo control. It's a double-blind study. That is what regulators look for to determine whether a drug works and is safe and whether it should be given approval.
Meg, we've also had some data of late on the other sort of big hope for a treatment, the drug names that have been thrown around of hydroxychloroquine, which I guess wasn't as encouraging as it could have been. I mean, are hopes for a treatment sort of set back at the moment relative to where we were 2, 3, 4 weeks ago?
Well, the data are emerging quickly, and unfortunately, we don't have great trials to see yet. We've heard folks like Scott Gottlieb say he doesn't think that the data that we've seen on hydroxychloroquine look particularly compelling right now. I'm also hearing from analysts who are looking at the use of that drug as a preventive for getting the disease as potentially being more promising. And we're just going to have to wait to see clinical trials on that readout. There's a big one being performed at the University of Minnesota right now. So as we wait for the official clinical trials, because there is so much attention in this space and there is so much work going on, we're going to keep seeing these little trickles out of information. It's going to keep affecting the markets. It's going to keep affecting our optimism about whether we'll get a treatment. But what I can tell you with certainty is that I've never seen the drug industry work this collectively towards something before, and we should be getting real information soon.
And it's a really important point, Meg, that I don't think is made that often. How did remdesivir become such a sort of big, sort of tentpole question here for the markets that move the market when there's so many other seemingly promising antivirals, antibody cocktail treatments like Regeneron has, and other sort of things in treatment right now? the anti-inflammatory drugs that are being used on, a regular basis. How did remdesivir sort of get to the front of the line here?
It's a really good question. I think part of it is that it was a drug that was furthest along. It was ready to be tested. There was animal data suggesting it could potentially work. And so, Wall Street kind of seized on it as something where we're going to get answers very soon. The things like what Regeneron's doing with the antibody drugs is developing an entirely new drug, and multiple other companies are doing that too. That's going to take longer. They may work better. In terms of the rheumatoid arthritis drugs that you mentioned, those are potentially promising as well, and we should see data from Regeneron again, probably within the next week or two, to see how well those work. That's for very severe patients who are having that lung inflammation, who are in the hospital. But I think the Gilead tentpole for the market really is because the drug was ready to be tested when this all kind of began.